Hello and welcome back to The Shed. Today I want to take a look at the second novel in the Broken Earth series by N.K Jemisin, the novel that won the 2017 Hugo Award in the Obelisk Gate. Now, that's a bit of a difference. What I'll be doing today is actually reviewing the audiobook, but I'll keep the format like I have been doing for the last 70 odd videos, which is provide a bit of a plot overview, talk to what I liked, what I didn't like. I'll put it to the memory test. Now, this is the first time I've read this one, so I'm just gonna really mention what I think will be memorable in this novel. I'll make some recommendations and then I'll rank it on our ever-growing Sci-Fi Shed ladder, where I've been ranking all these wonderful novels. So just as a bit of a warning, there may be some spoilers for the first novel, the 5th season, if you haven't already read that. It's a bit difficult making a review of a sequel and not give spoilers to what happens in the first novel. But I'll try to minimize that as much as I can, but just be warned, I guess. So in order to provide a pretty decent plot overview for this second book, I'm going to say some words like fulcrum and origin and comms that may be all a bit over your head if you haven't read the first novel. So I've put a link down below to the first book so you may get a feel for what I'm talking about, just to maximize the time that we have for this particular review. So what we have is the main protagonist, Esun, still separated from her daughter, Nasun. And that's because Nasun is with her father, who has just killed her little brother. And he's killed her little brother because he's learnt that her little brother was an origin. And he's suspecting that, hang on, just maybe, I think Nasun's an origin as well, and we've got to fix this, we've got to heal her. So he's on his way to this fulcrum, this type of fulcrum at least, that is being run by guardians, because he feels that if he can get her there, they may just be able to heal her from this origin affliction that she has. On the other hand, we have Esun, who's now quite heavily involved in this comms called Castrema. So she's one of the seniors in this comm, and they're still working with Alabaster, who, as a bit of a spoiler for the first novel, is starting to turn into stone because of some stone eaters. So he's started to really continuously turn into stone, and he's still trying to, Alabaster that is still trying to teach Esun what orogeny really is about and how it works, because he's doing some of this thing by nature. It just comes to him almost by nature, and he's having a real difficult time trying to explain this to Esun for her to comprehend what this exactly is. On the other hand, what we also find in this comms is that there are some roguers, some people, women in particular, who practice origin almost by instinct. So they have no formal training in the fulcrum, and Esun and these rogue comms people are working together trying to understand orogeny and how these obelisks that we learnt about in the first novel really mean, what they are and how they can be used. And on the other hand, we learn about Esun, her working with this fulcrum, and her father is a pretty interesting character. He's got some backstories that is rather interesting as well, but he really fears origins, and he's doing whatever he can to heal his daughter from what he thinks is a terrible affliction. But in doing so, he really alienates his daughter, and she sort of starts clinging towards this guy called Shaffer. And Shaffer is one of these guardians who are there to sort of guard these origins to ensure that they don't run amok and cause an end to the world. So she builds this relationship with Shaffer, all the while separating herself from the father, to what will become a final conflict there as well. Look, and this all ultimately comes together with the two stories coming to a climatic end. So what was it that I liked about this one? I guess a couple of points on the audiobook. The version that I read was narrated by a person called Robin Miles, and I thought she did a wonderful job of narrating this novel, because I found her dictation very clear and she was very engaging, because at times I find that, if the narration is not great, if the reader doesn't keep you captivated, your mind starts to drift, at least mine does, and I lose some key points to the novel. But I'd have to say that that Robin did a wonderful job with this particular version of the novel. That kept me engaged. She just had subtle differences in her voice, and the characterizations was wonderful. That kept me fully engaged throughout the whole 14-hour novel that it was. So yeah, so good marks for the actual audiobook on this one. So when it comes to the novel itself, in the first book, I really criticized N.K Jemisin's writing. I mentioned a couple of times that her writing just did not appeal to me. I just couldn't get over it. But I did make a couple of observations there that I thought the writing suffered from bad editing was my initial sort of summary of that novel. I just thought it just anyway, I'll link it down below so you can see my full review of the first novel. But I did mention in that review that her writing definitely got better as the book went on, to the point that I actually was enjoying the writing as well. And I would have to say that in this particular novel, I thought the writing was much, much better. Honestly, there was a couple of moments right at the beginning where I literally rolled my eyes as I was listening to the narration. Well, rolled my eyes and thought, oh, here we go again, not again. But I'm happy to report that only happened once this time round, and was right very early on at the beginning. So that swayed you from continuing to read. But I found the rest of the novel to be really actually well written. The other thing I would have to say is I actually enjoyed the character of Nasun, Esun's daughter. I thought she was a really interesting character, and I really quite enjoyed her. So I'd have to give her props again for the characterizations there, particularly for Nasun. The other thing that I enjoyed was the world building. I made a comment on that in the first book as well. I do like this concept of this origin and how it works. And in this second novel, Jemisin's pitched in a bit of magic into it as well. So this orogeny seems to be a mixture of, capabilities in humans mixed with magic and sort of all sorts of wonderful things. And I do enjoy the world building in general. So what was it that I didn't like? I remember in the first book, it was mostly negative, right? And in this book, again, I would have to say that my main problem, as I finished this novel, I was just sitting there, I was thinking, why is it that I just don't like this series? And I think for me, as I was pondering on this question, it comes down to Esun. And my problem with the first book is so much of that story, written in those different narrative styles, was about Esun. And I just don't like this character. She just annoys me. I just find her so annoying, and just so annoying. It's probably one of my top 5 most annoying characters that I've ever read in a science fiction or fantasy novel. I just don't like Esun. She gets under my skin. So I'd have to say that in the second book here, her demeanor doesn't get any better for me, and I still cannot understand that person. And I just don't like the character of Esun. And like I mentioned, there are some eye-rolling moments when it comes to the writing itself, but this time at least it was minimized, and there was only 1 or 2 instances of that very early on, but I did find the rest of the novel well written. But the other thing I'd have to say is that the plot is really slow going. So this is another one of those novels that when I finished it, I was sitting there thinking, what was this whole novel about? It really does suffer from that second novel syndrome, where it just a whole lot of bloat and not very much happens at all. And I don't know, look, it was much better than I thought it was in the first novel. I have to give it that. But I just still found it so slow going. And I thought, the writing made it enjoyable, at least in this one. But I just felt the plot was just not going anywhere. And when there are key critical moments in the plot that you actually want to expand and delve on, just happened like a click of a fingers. So I don't know, really weird pacing in this one that I didn't thoroughly enjoy at all. The other thing that really annoys me, and it becomes even more apparent when you're listening to the audiobook, is one of the things that just completely annoys the hell out of me when it comes to Esun. I mean, every single one of her exclamations is rust this or F that or, earth this, and she's constantly having a hissy fit about something. And it's really obvious when you listen to the audiobook, because like I said, I think Robin Miles did a really good job of characterization there. But I just this Esun character and the writing just is one of the key things that just is a huge stumbling block for me in enjoying this novel. So when it comes to the memory test, I mentioned when I reviewed the 5th season that this was one of those novels that I literally did not finish first time round. And it was just because of the Sci-Fi Shed that I actually recalled, I actually haven't read this, and I made a comment in the first video. So this is the first time I've read The Obelisk Gate, but I'm going to have to say that the memory test is going to fail miserably on this one. And the reason I say that is literally as soon as I finish this, I sort of take a sit down and I'll write myself a couple of notes, right? Just to give you a bit of an insight as to how I do these reviews, right? So I just write down a couple of bullet points, right? Some key takeaways from the novel that I can talk to, and that's why these are sort of spontaneous, because I put literally 1 or 2 liners as to what I want to talk about, and off I go, right? And as I sat down to put a couple of bullet points down, I was just scratching my head thinking, what am I going to talk about? What actually happened in this novel? Apart from having Essen and Nasun, living their lives separately and, a couple of interesting things happening there, what is there to talk about? And I would almost, couldn't recall. I really struggled to think, what am I going to talk about when it comes to the plot overview, which sort of really talks to the memory test. If I couldn't remember the key highlights in this novel that I only just read, I just cannot see how I would remember this novel 2 or 3 years down the track, right, as the key moments. So I'd have to say that when it comes to the memory test, for me, I don't think this book will last the test of time. I doubt I would remember what this novel was about in 2 weeks' time, honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that I've shot this review, forced myself to write some notes and rank it on our Sci-Fi Shed ladder. So again, I think it's going to do pretty badly with time when it comes to the memory test. So look, when it comes to recommendations, I find it really difficult to recommend this one. It's just not a series that appeals to me. We've got 2 of the 3 novels now down, and I've got to say, from my personal reading experience, my personal reading pleasure, I just think this novel series is just so overrated. I just don't understand why it gets the love that it gets. Look, and that's not entirely true. I do understand why. I can see some magic elements in this novel, right? Some things that are really, really good, very well done in the series, but I just don't like Jemisin's writing. It's not even so much as the concept, but the execution and her writing that I just don't enjoy. And I also think her characters are weak, and this book in particular suffer from that second novel syndrome, where just absolutely nothing almost happens. Look, there may still be room for this series to redeem itself in the 3rd book, so I'll be happy to summarize that when I get to it. But for now, I'd have to say, look, I can't personally recommend this one. I think there are so much better fantasy novels out there that I've enjoyed over the years that I highly recommend over this one. But look, having said all of that, if a person was to come up to me and say, Pete, I know you like your science fiction and fantasy novels, what would you recommend? Look, off the top of my head, I'd rattle books off like Gene Wolfe's The New Sun trilogy, or others that sort of blend that science fiction and fantasy elements. I've always really enjoyed Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. I thought that was a great, trilogy. So there's so many wonderful fantasy novels that I would recommend over this one. But look, to be fair, I would say, but also be aware of the Broken Earth series. It gets a lot of love. A lot of people really do enjoy this novel, and you may be one of them, so you maybe want to give it a try. But this is my personal view, right? So I would still mention this novel because it would be hard not to, right? It's a Hugo award-winning novel. All 3 books have won a Hugo. It's loved by thousands, if not millions of people. Hundreds of thousands of people. So it's definitely one that you need to mention when it comes to fantasy novels. So look, it's going to be interesting to see if it's redeemed itself on the Sci-Fi Shed ladder. So let me flip the cameras around and we'll see exactly where this one's going to rank on the Sci-Fi Shed ladder. So back to the Shed ladder and ranking tonight's 2017 Hugo award-winning novel by N.K Jemisin, The Obelisk Gate. Now, at the moment, we've got the 5th season by N.K Jemisin right at the bottom of the Sci-Fi Shed ladder. And I've got the video below if you really want to see what that is. But look, when it comes to the Shed ladder, right, and I've mentioned in the past, and I've got it down in the description as to the weighted inputs that are used to rank these novels. And things that I look for are the concepts, how strong are the concepts? And I'd have to say that the concept, I still do enjoy this world that N.K Jemisin's done. So it got a middle of the range sort of weighting when it comes to the concept itself. But for me, where this novel just did not stack up yet again was in the execution of that concept. The characters for me, I just I really don't like that Esun character. It was a little bit better than the first, because the first focused so much on her that I didn't like. But then again, I did like Alabaster in the first novel as well. I thought he was a pretty cool character. And I would have to say that Alabaster, unfortunately, doesn't play much of a role in the middle of this novel here, the second novel. He's still in there, but he doesn't play quite the part he did in the first. And I did enjoy the daughter, the Nasun character, so I thought she was pretty good too. But because so much of this novel is focused on Esun, and my dislike for her just makes me give it a pretty poor rating when it comes to the Sci-Fi Share Ladder ranking. The other thing is the writing, right? And now with the writing, like, it was better than the first book. In the first book, I think I gave it like a 0, like when it comes to the writing. I really didn't like the writing at all. The writing in the Obelisk Gate is better than what we found in the 5th season, so I gave it a couple of points extra for that. The other thing I talk about is the plot. You know, how well does the plot, the pacing, the twists and turns through the plot. And I'd have to say again that this one just wasn't going anywhere for me. Very similar to what I found in the 5th season, where I got, I think it was like halfway through the 5th season, I thought, I just don't care about these characters. I don't know what's going on, and nor do I care to understand what's going on. Very similar kind of feelings with the Obelisk Gate, but I'd have to say that we're not near as bad, right? So I'd have to say that it still suffered from the same thing when it comes to the plot, and the plot not really going anywhere, and me not really being invested in these characters enough to care. Largely the same criticism here, but it wasn't as bad as I found it to be in the 5th season. And the other thing that I look at is the ending, which again, I thought the ending here, like, there was so little going on, it's so bloated. And in the endings, the areas that you did want to have a bit of a look at, as in, spend some time in the ending and build some kind of action and suspense around that ending with a punch, just didn't execute as well. So it got very low marks, if 0 marks, when it comes to the ending. And the other one is a memory test, which also is a pretty heavily weighted thing. And I'd have to say that this one I just don't think will stand the test of time, as I alluded to in my overview video, is that it just doesn't give you anything with memory, with putting to the memory banks. Not for me at least. So having said all of that, it's going to sit right on top of the No, it's not. I think you know where it's going to go. It's going to go towards the bottom of the shed ladder. And is it going to be better than the 5th season? It's really where we're stuck tonight. And I'm going to say it is. I think the Obelisk Gate, as much as the plot... look, it's an interesting one. But I've given you the overview as a rating system. But the thing that really sets the Obelisk Gate above the 5th season for me was the writing was so much better. What we don't get that we got in the 5th season, the first novel, was that world building, right? So you learn all these new concepts of orogeny and fulcrums and these the strong backs and all these interesting world elements, right, that are introduced that make, and the Stone Eaters, all these things were really interesting and exciting. That sort of made the world building exciting and interesting. We largely don't get any of that in the Obelisk Gate. There are no new real surprises when it comes to the world building. I mean, the obelisks, we learn a little bit more about how they operate, and it is rather interesting how that happens as well. But it didn't have the same punch as the 5th season, but overall, I think it's a better book. Hey, that's where we sit tonight. I know this is a controversial one. I know people absolutely love this series. But for me, like, look, I'm not going to pretend to like something that I don't. And that's where we're going to sit now. But I do appreciate and I do understand that this is a horses for courses type book, right? I know there are people that love this novel, and I'm happy for you. I'm happy that you found something that makes you enjoy reading and you sit down and fall in love with these books. That makes everyone a winner. So thank you for spending time with me in the shed, and I hope to see you next time. What am I reading at the moment? Is it going to keep us away from this bottom of the ladder? I think there is. I'm about 3/4 of the way through the next one, and I've got a feeling that it will be somewhat much better than where we are tonight. I hope to see you next time in the shed.